What is up, everybody? Sven Diesel here. We're going to be tying up an RS2. This is a pattern by Rim Chung. It's basically a mayfly emerger, a midge emerger. It can be fished as a dry. It can be fished in the film. That's primarily where I fish it. And so let's go ahead and get started. We're going to have an Arex FW502. This is a dry fly fly. And we're going to be using some Semperfly wax thread. It's in an 8/0, which is a little bit big for a dry fly, but I'll show you why here. I just like using one thread. So I'm going to take out twice as much thread as I normally do to start my thread, and you'll see why. So start that, touching wraps all the way back. Make sure to keep that tag end up on the top of the shank, and then what we're going to do is we're going to fold it over, and we're going to go ahead and tie in that other end. This is why I wanted it twice as long. And you'll see why in a minute. Surprise, surprise. It's a suspense. So go ahead and tie that off, and then make sure it's on top of the shank. We'll trim out that tag end now, and then holding both fibers somewhat tight, keep that on the top of the shank. That's critical. You want it in the middle of the top here, because you'll see why in a minute. More suspense. But wrap a little bit into the bend, but not too much, and then advance your thread to the middle of the shank. Now, for the tails, a lot of people use micro fibbits. I just have a ton of this fox bucktail, and these are 6 inches long. This is gray. I just am using these as my tails. It's really nice. It gives you 6 inches to work with. You don't need all that, but I like to do my tail on these. It's a split tail, and I like to do it roughly 1 to 1.5 the length of the shank, and we want to make sure those tips are aligned when we tie it in. Otherwise it makes it a little bit difficult, but I'm just going to do a pinch wrap right there once I've measured where I want it, and we'll go ahead and do a couple securing wraps, and then we'll get this remainder of this 6 inches out of the way. You can see you really only need 1 inch, so we're wasting a little bit of material, but not a big deal. And we'll go ahead and tie in those ends, and then we'll advance our thread back to the bend, but not all the way to where we took our thread. But the key is keep these on top of the shank, and you want to kind of make sure that they're not stacked one on top of each other, but rather side to side. I know that's hard to see in this video, but we'll advance that all the way back to just a wrap or two before the thread we had before. And here's where it gets cool. You can use your bodkin or your scissors and go ahead and split these tails just right down the middle. And you want to hold your tag end thread that we saved now with a little bit of tension, and we're going to split those ends, hold it in place, being careful not to cut those, and then I'll advance my thread in between the two of them, and then go ahead and pull it tight. And that is how I split my tail. Pretty cool. I've seen a few other techniques. This has just worked for me. I know there's a lot of different methodologies out there and techniques to do this, but this is what I like to do. And then I do about 3 to 5 wraps out in front, and then wrap back over it, and it is now secure. And we'll end our thread probably right around the point of the barb, trim out our thread. And the reason I had it so long, it just makes it a little easier to work with. But you can see right there, it's a perfect split. It's level right now with the hook, which we want to raise it up, but I will use the dubbing for that to do that. Another technique I've seen is doing like figure eights around it. I find that just a little difficult for me personally, but we're just going to use a dry fly dubbing here. I know the original pattern calls for, I think he used Beaver dubbing, but we're just using a heather gray dry fly dubbing similar to an Adams. And we'll go ahead and dub that on in a tight noodle, and then this is the way that we raise those tail fibers up, is we do a couple behind wraps and snug it up tight right up against them. And if it's not high enough, do a second wrap and pull it up, and there you go, raises it right up. Now in his pattern, he wraps these dubbing really tight and almost makes it look like corded material. I just have it as tight as I can get it and dub up, and that's good enough for me. But I can see how the segmented body is of benefit. And the other thing I like to do a little bit different is I do a little bit of a bigger thorax on mine. So you can see I ended probably 2 eye gaps behind. But for the wing, we're going to be using the Nature's Spirit. This is Trout Hunter. These CDC are just amazing. Look, these are just full. I usually grab 2, and you can see the butt ends are really thick, and so I'm going to try and avoid having those in my wing. And so I'll tie them in so that I've got plenty of wing to work with, but I'm going to be cutting off the thicker, chunkier part of the butt ends. So we'll go ahead and make sure that's on the top of the shank, and we'll cut out those butt ends now. And at this point, I like to get my wing in position, and with making sure not to tie in those that fox bucktail or tailing, but I'll do a couple behind wraps and in front wraps just to kind of poof that up so it's straight. I've seen, you could use your dubbing for this on the thorax and do a wrap behind. That would also pop it up, but I like to keep it as slender as possible. And so for the thorax, we're going to use the same dubbing as our abdomen, the heather gray, but I just mix a little brown in, just a smidge. That way it adds a little bit of contrast and a little bit of a darker thorax on there. And I will just dub it on. And since we're using a pre-waxed thread, it's going on really nice. And I'll do the same thing, try to keep that tight noodle, but not concerned with making it completely corded. And then I'll do a little bit thicker as I work my way from the wing to the eye, and we'll go ahead and end right there behind the eye. So you can see my proportion is about, that wing is an extra eye length in behind the eye, but that's just how I've always tied it and fished it, and so I just still do it that way. Now we'll whip finish, cut out our thread, and then what you want to do is take this wing, and being careful not to grab your tail, you want to snip it at about a 60-degree angle, as steep as you can get it in your convenience without having a camera between your arms right now. But you just want to come down, snip it, make sure to get all the fibers, and then if you missed one or two, just go ahead and clean that up. And this is a really quick tie. I fished it really well in the film. That's primarily where I fish it. And go ahead and tie some up. The color combinations are endless, and hope they pierce some lips for you. Thanks for watching.